Think about the last time you felt completely safe. Maybe it was your home. Maybe it was your parents' retirement savings. Maybe it was simply the belief that the world's financial system, the invisible infrastructure that keeps modern life running, knew what it was doing. In 2008, 70 million people around the world felt that safety disappear. 7 million American families lost their homes. Retirement accounts evaporated overnight. Entire economies collapsed. And the strangest part, it can all be traced back to one man. Not a villain, not a fraudster, not even a banker. A mathematician who in 1997 sat down and tried to solve an interesting problem. He didn't cause the crisis on purpose. He didn't profit from it. He warned people it was coming, and nobody listened. This is the story of David X. Lee, and the formula that was never meant to end this way. To understand what Lee created, you need to understand what the world looked like before him. For most of the 20th century, getting a mortgage was painfully simple. You walked into your local bank. You asked for a loan to buy a house. The bank manager looked you in the eye, reviewed your finances, and made a decision. If you got the loan, you paid the bank back every month with interest. The bank made money slowly and steadily, year after year. And here's the crucial part. The bank kept your mortgage. It sat on their books, which meant if you stopped paying, they absorbed the loss. That shared risk made banks careful. It made them ask hard questions. It made the whole system stable. Then America fell in love with home ownership. After World War II, a house wasn't just a roof over your head, it was proof you'd made it. Government programs made mortgages cheaper. The suburbs expanded. And for decades, house prices climbed in a clean, steady line upward. By the 1980s and 90s, Wall Street was watching that rising line very carefully. Because on Wall Street, a rising line isn't a comfort. It's an opportunity. They just needed a way to get into the game. They needed a product, and they needed someone who could make it feel safe. David X. Lee grew up in rural China in the 1960s. He was exceptional at mathematics from a young age, the kind of person who finds more comfort in equations than in conversation. He earned economics degrees in China, then flew to Canada for graduate school, an MBA, then a PhD in statistics. By the late 1990s, he was a quantitative analyst, a quant, at a major financial firm in New York. Quants were the secret weapons of Wall Street. Physicists and mathematicians brought in to do one thing: turn uncertainty into numbers, turn risk into something you could put in a spreadsheet, turn the unknown into the manageable. Lee had one obsession, a problem that had frustrated financial mathematicians for years. It was called correlation. Here's what that means. Imagine two homeowners, one in Miami, one in Minnesota. If the Miami homeowner loses their job and can't pay their mortgage, does that make it more likely the Minnesota homeowner will default too? Probably not. They're strangers. Their lives are unconnected. But what if 10,000 homeowners all defaulted at once? Would that be random bad luck? Or would it mean something systemic was happening? This was the question Lee needed to answer, because Wall Street had just invented a product where getting that answer exactly right was worth billions of dollars. Here's the product, and I'm going to explain it with a pizza. Imagine a pizza where every slice represents a different mortgage. Slice 1 is rock solid, a surgeon with perfect credit. Slice 5 is decent, a teacher, steady income, modest savings. Slice 8 is risky, someone who stretched to buy a house they probably couldn't afford. Now imagine you sell that pizza to investors. Not the whole pizza, slices. The pitch is elegant. Even if a few slices go bad, the whole pizza stays valuable, because they can't all go bad at once. Banks called these products mortgage-backed securities. Thousands of mortgages bundled together, sliced up, and sold to investors around the world. The idea had existed since the 1980s, but it had one problem. Nobody could prove it was actually safe. Rating agencies, the firms responsible for telling investors how risky a product was, didn't have a mathematical framework to assess it. Without a reliable safety rating, institutional investors couldn't touch these products. Pension funds, insurance companies, foreign banks, they needed a stamp of approval backed by real math. Enter David X. Lee. In 2000, he published a paper introducing the Gaussian Copula function. You don't need to understand the formula. What it did was give Wall Street something they had desperately wanted, a single number that told you how likely all the mortgages in a bundle were to fail at the same time. It was fast, it worked in a spreadsheet, it gave a clean answer, and it was wrong, but not in a way anyone wanted to admit. Within 2 years, Lee's copula was being used by every major bank on Earth. Rating agencies used it to stamp bundles of mortgages with AAA ratings, the highest possible grade, the same grade as US Treasury bonds. The message to investors: these are as safe as it gets. Investors bought and bought and bought. Here's where the story turns. When banks discovered they could originate a mortgage and immediately sell it into a bundle, they realized something important. They no longer held the risk. And when you don't hold the risk, you stop asking hard questions. Lending standards began to dissolve. By 2004, banks were approving mortgages with no income verification, no employment check. Some required no down payment at all. These were called ninja loans. No income, no job, no assets. It didn't matter because the formula said the bundle was safe. And because the bundle was rated AAA, pension funds, insurance companies, university endowments, and foreign banks in countries that had never seen a single American street, they bought it. Between 2003 and 2006, over $2 trillion worth of these products were created and sold. Everyone was winning. Home prices kept rising. Bonuses kept growing. But there was one thing Lee's formula could not account for. The formula was built on historical data, and in all of recorded American history, house prices had never fallen nationally all at the same time, so the model assumed they never would. In 2005, the Federal Reserve began raising interest rates. Monthly mortgage payments across America started climbing. Millions of homeowners who had bought at the absolute edge of what they could afford started to slip. The cracks appeared quietly. In early 2007, default rates on subprime mortgages began rising, not dramatically, just enough to matter. Because here was the thing nobody wanted to say out loud. The mortgages in those bundles weren't independent. When one neighborhood struggled, nearby neighborhoods followed. When one city's prices fell, surrounding cities fell too. The pizza slices weren't separate. They were made from the same dough. June 2007. Bear Stearns, one of the most powerful investment banks in the world, announced that 2 of its hedge funds, loaded with mortgage-backed securities, had lost almost everything, almost overnight. The market flinched, then told itself this was contained. It was not contained. September 15, 2008. Lehman Brothers, a firm 158 years old, filed for bankruptcy, the largest bankruptcy in American history. What followed wasn't panic the way movies show it. No men running through streets. It was quieter and more terrifying. Banks stopped lending to each other. because nobody knew which bank was holding toxic mortgages, and nobody trusted anyone. Then came AIG, an insurance company that had used Lee's copula to calculate that the risk of insuring trillions of dollars in mortgage bundles was essentially zero. When the bundles collapsed, AIG owed money it simply did not have. The US government stepped in with an $85 billion bailout in a single weekend. By October 2008, global stock markets had shed over $10 trillion in a single month. Unemployment in the United States hit 10%. 7 million families received foreclosure notices. Retirement savings gone. Small businesses closed. Recessions cascading across Europe, Asia, and beyond. All of it running, in some thread, back to one formula, one assumption, one man who never meant for any of it. Here is the part of the story you were never supposed to hear. In 2005, 3 years before the collapse, David X. Lee gave an interview. He said, "The most dangerous part is when people believe everything coming out of it." He knew, not that the crisis was coming, but that his model had hard limits. He had always intended the copula as a rough estimate, a starting point, a tool to be used alongside human judgment, not instead of it. But Wall Street didn't want a conversation. Wall Street wanted a number, one green light, one permission slip to keep printing money. Lee's formula gave them exactly that. So who was responsible? The mathematician who built the tool, the banks that stripped out every caveat, the rating agencies paid by the very banks they were meant to objectively assess, who stamped it all AAA regardless, the regulators who watched and did nothing, the politicians who celebrated rising home ownership without asking how it was financed, the investors who bought products they never truly understood. The honest answer is, all of them. The more uncomfortable answer is, the system was specifically designed so that nobody ever had to admit it. Because when everyone profits from not asking questions, nobody asks questions. After the crisis, David X. Lee left Wall Street. He returned to China, where he took a position at a state financial institution. He rarely spoke publicly again. In one of his final interviews before leaving public life entirely, he said, "Very few people understand the essence of the model." He wasn't wrong, and that is, somehow, the most unsettling part of this entire story. He built something that was, within its limits, mathematically sound. He stated those limits clearly in the published paper itself. He warned out loud, years in advance, that misuse was dangerous. And then he watched the world take his careful, qualified idea, strip out every caveat, and drive it at full speed into a wall. We tell ourselves that disasters have clear villains, that someone must have known, that greed is always deliberate. But the 2008 financial crisis is a different kind of story. It's the story of a world that found a powerful tool for managing risk and used it as a reason to stop thinking about risk altogether. The tools we build have lives of their own. In finance, in technology, in medicine, in any field where a model moves faster than the judgment it was meant to support. The question has never just been, does this work? The question, the one we keep forgetting to ask, is, what happens when the wrong people believe it works perfectly? 7 million families, $20 trillion, one formula. And somewhere, in a quiet office in Beijing, a man who only ever wanted to solve an interesting problem is still not entirely sure he got the answer right.